We're obviously in a very interesting place, and we'll talk about the shul, but first let's talk about the larger topic of city versus shtetl. I mentioned earlier today there were more than 900 Jewish communities in Poland in 1939. Most of them were small communities like this one, Tykocin or Tykocin. Most of them had a few thousand people living in the entire community. And of course, it was very different living in the city and living in a shtetl. And while by 1939, the largest Jewish communities in the cities had grown very, very large, hundreds of thousands of people, 380,000 in Warsaw, probably about 200,000 Jews in Lodz, and other communities that also had many tens of thousands of Jews. The Jews in those cities comprised about a third of the city. But in the shtetl, the Jews were the majority of the population. Here in Tykocin and Tykocin, the Jews were 2/3 of the population in the 19th century. So in shtetl life, as opposed to city life, the street was much more of a Jewish street. The feel of the town was much more Jewish because of the much higher percentage of Jews living in these smaller towns. The Jews and the non-Jews lived side by side. Sometimes they played together as kids. They certainly did business together, but they lived in totally different worlds. They lived according to a different calendar. Not only holidays, every week, their day of rest was a different day of rest. They spoke a different language. But this whole area, Bialystok itself, by the way, was 50% Jewish before the war. This whole area, the first Jewish community in this area was right here in Tykocin in 1522. The local nobleman invites 10 male Jews and allows them to bring their families because he understands that the Jews will want to have a minyan. And they build a shul on this location. Well, they build it out of the most common building material that was around, which was, of course, wood. And as happened to most wooden shuls, there was a fire. The shul burned down. And the next shul they build on the same spot is this shul in 1642. So this shul is how old? 370 years old, something like that, close to 400 years old. In the 17th and 18th centuries, this is a significant community and has a number of gedolim who are the rabbis here. The Maharsha, Rav Shmuel Edels, lives here in the late 1500s and the early 1600s. And the Pnei Yehoshua lives here in the early 1630s. Rav Yehuda Ashkenazi, if you ever learned Mishnah Brura, you know one of the commentaries on the Mishnah Brura is the BRS. The BRS lived here in Tykocin in the 1700s. Rav Avram Kalmanovich, who established the Mir Yeshiva in New York after the war, came from here, from Tykocin. In this particular place, it's interesting to note that there's also a very prominent woman who is from this place, who descended from this place, and that is a woman named Rivka Tiktiner, right? Rivka of Tykocin. Rivka of Tykocin, and she wrote a book. She wrote a book called Meineket Rivka, the nursemaid of Rivka. It's a book about Hilchot Nashim, laws that women in particular should learn about and keep. It's a book that was written in Yiddish, although she wrote an introduction in Hebrew, a rhymed introduction, a poem, and she has some fascinating things that she writes about, in addition to the halachot. And by the way, she quotes not only from Tanakh and Midrashim, but she quotes from Gemara, she quotes from Rashi, It's very clear that she was a very educated woman, writing around 1600. In 1862, there were 3,500 Jews here, and they made up somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the town's population. At that time, in the interwar years, there was, of course, a very important portion of the population that was religious, but there was already also a strong Zionist movement and a Tarbut school here. There were already people who were moving away from religious observance and becoming more modern. If we look at this shul, how does this shul seem to differ from shuls that we're familiar with? The writing on the walls. The writing on the walls. Why was it that they had writing on walls? Okay. When is the printing press invented? Printing press is invented in the 1400s, the last half of the 1400s, okay, Gutenberg. And Hebrew printing begins in the very end of the 1400s, beginning of the 1500s. Venice, Prague, and Lublin were three of the biggest publishing houses of Hebrew printing in the 1500s and 1600s. So the printing press causes a revolution in Jewish life. Just imagine for a moment how much a siddur cost before the printing press was invented. We all know what a mezuzah costs, right? Because it's hand done. Now imagine if it's not just a few parshiot of Shema, but now imagine it's all of the tefillot. Imagine how expensive that is. Most Jews didn't have a siddur before the printing press was invented. They davened ba'al peh. That's why we have chazarat hashatz. But when you think about it, the printing press was already invented. Hebrew printing is already around in the early 1500s. And when did I say this shul was built? 1642. Why are they still writing on the walls? That's what you do in a shul, is you put tefillot on the walls, right? And even if you have a siddur, that's the convention, you keep doing it. Now I want to come to the question of, what's all this writing doing here now? What's this shul doing here now? This is the only place of its kind in this entire region. And I don't know if you noticed before we came in, and don't look now, but sitting in back of us, there are always Polish people who come here. And here they learn something about the Jewish life that once existed.
Dr. Bernstein gave us the history of Tykocin, of this shul. In 1921, there were 1,401 Jews in the city. And from what I understand, they made up 49% of the population. Nearly half the residents of this town, of this shtetl, were Jewish. And that should resonate for us, those who live in Boca, because there's a new demographic study being done now. But the last one, which is already 10 years old, showed that the Jewish population of Boca Raton Del Rey is 51%. We represent more than half the population of Boca. It's unimaginable, unfathomable to us that there would ever be a day that someone would visit Boca Raton and say, look at the Boca Raton synagogue, notice the architecture, notice how they used to live. Is there a kosher Sefer Torah? Oh no, Jews haven't lived here in a long time. The idea that we can be half the population and yet disappear, be erased, have not one Jew to visit in this town. The closest we come is a Magen David at the house next door, is something unimaginable and unfathomable. And of course we're going to talk about, if there was such a presence, a vibrancy of the Jewish community here, where did it go? What happened? We're going to find out in a moment what happened to the Jews of Tykocin. But before we do, and before we daven mincha, I want to tell you a story. And it's a story that I first heard from my dear friend, a good friend to many of us, Rabbi Josh Fass, who used to be a rabbi in Boca, today is the founder and head of Nefesh B'Nefesh. He visited an elderly gentleman who was on his deathbed, someone at the end of his life. One of the unenviable jobs of a rabbi is to have to be with people and usher them transition from this world to the next. He was visiting this man on his deathbed, an immigrant survivor. And the man turned to Rabbi Fass and he summoned all of his strength on his deathbed and he said to Rabbi Fass, Ich gehe tanzen mit dem Malachim. I'm going soon to dance with the angels. And the rabbi thought to a moment this uncomfortable comment, what exactly did it mean? And he just assumed it meant the man understood and anticipated that he was nearing his end. And so he said to the old man, yes, it's beautiful. You've led a virtuous life. Certainly you're worthy of the world to come. Undoubtedly, you will soon be dancing with the angels. And the man said, no. Emes, ich gehe tanzen mit dem Malachim jetzt. No, for real. I'm going to dance now for real with the angels. And again, the rabbi said, your positive attitude is amazing. And you're most certainly going to Gan Eden and most certainly will dance with the angels. And the old man said no. And with the little strength he had left, he insisted on telling the rabbi the following story. He said, over 50 years ago, there was a village, a small town, a shtetl, just like this, with the similar houses and a similar layout and a shul at its center, just like the one we're in right now. One day the SS, the Nazi guards, marched in and they rounded up all the families into the town square. And among those families, and within one of those families, there was an 8-year-old boy named Moshe. And Moshe, of course, didn't understand at 8 years old what was happening. Why were they being rounded up? Why were their lives being interrupted? What was happening? And where were they going? Somehow he was under the impression they were about to go on a trip. They were about to undertake a journey. But it was Chol Hamoed Sukkos. Maybe it was Shmini Atzeres. It was certainly right before Simchas Torah. And the 8-year-old Moshe, his favorite day of the year that he looked forward to, that he counted down towards, was Simchas Torah. So little Moshe began to pull on his father's pant leg at the roundup. And he said, Mekenish tanzen on Simchas Torah? If we go on this trip, if we go on this journey, we're going to miss the dancing. I love Simchas Torah, the candies and tying up the talesim and dancing in the circles around and around. We can't go now. If we go on this trip, we're going to miss the dancing and Simchas Torah. But his father kept saying to little Moshe, Shah, still. Shh, be quiet. Stop talking. But Moshe was insistent, Tata, we're going to miss the dancing. We'll go later. We don't have to go now. What are we doing here? His father just kept trying to quiet him. Shah, still. Why are you talking? An SS guard overheard Moshe. And he said to him, Tanzen, you want to dance? And he yanked him by the collar, this little boy. And he drew him out of the whole lineup. And he proceeded to grab another young boy and then another young boy and a fourth little boy. And he took the 4 boys in front of the whole town that had been gathered, had been round up. And he said to the 4 boys who were scared at that moment out of their minds, the SS guard turned to him and he said, Tanz! Dance! And the 4 boys didn't know what to do. So they joined hands. And the 4 of them formed a circle. And though there was certainly no music playing, to the absolute silence of the whole town watching, the 4 boys held hands and they began to dance, they began to dance. The guard, the Nazi, who was entertaining himself, who was humored, took out his revolver and he pointed it to one of the 4 boys. Bang! He shot one of the 4 boys who fell, who dropped to the ground, who had been killed. The 3 boys stood there frozen solid, and the Nazi turned to them and he said, Tanz! Dance! And now the 3 took hands, frightened, and though there was no music, complete silence, began to dance in a circle. And again the Nazi, amused, entertained, took out his gun, his revolver, pointed at one of the little boys, pulled the trigger, boom! And another of the boys fell to the ground, murdered. And now there were 2 boys. And the SS guard, who was still entertained, said to them, Tanz! Dance! And now he took his gun and one of the 2 little boys, again, laughing out loud, he pointed his revolver, pulled the trigger, bang! The 3rd boy fell to the ground, murdered in front of the entire town, his family. Everybody watching. And now, there was only one boy standing. 8-year-old Moshele. He was petrified. He didn't know what was going to happen next. And the SS guard said to him, "Nu, tanz! You wanted to dance so badly? Dance!" Moshe was confused and he was petrified. He was now standing there alone. And he didn't know what to do. So he turned his palms towards the heavens. And he began to, by himself, he began to dance as if it was Simchas Torah. And the SS guard, rather than laugh, was bewildered. And he looked to little Moshele and he said, "What are you doing?" And Moshele looked up at him and he said, "I'm dancing with the malachim. I'm dancing with the angels." The SS guard dancing with the angels? And he grabbed little Moshele by the collar, enraged, and he said, "Get out of my face, you foolish little boy." And he threw him back into the crowd among the entire town who had gathered. And as this man lay on his deathbed at the end of his life, Rabbi Fast turned to him and he said, What happened next? What happened to the boy?" And the elderly man looked at him and he said, that little boy survived the war. And every single year for the rest of his life, wherever he was living, wherever, when Simchas Torah came, the whole shul gathered because they knew at some point on that Yontif, at some point in that dancing, there was an old man who was going to go into the middle of the circle without explanation and without warning, by himself with his palms facing to the heavens, and he was going to start dancing. The sick man then looked at Rabbi Fast and he told him with a smile, "I am Moshe. And yet, now, now I am going to really dance with the angels, with the malachim." We have the privilege of singing and dancing whenever we want and wherever we want. At the many simchas that we attend, in our communities on Simchas Torah, on different Yomim Tovim throughout the year. No revolvers are pointed our way. No one limits or precludes our ability to share our simcha as loudly and enthusiastically as we can. We have that ability when so many others no longer do. And in the memory of this older man, Moshele, and in the memory of the thousands who lived in this little shtetl of Tykocin, who all that's left is this shul, the Magid David on the home next door, who that tefillah on the back wall in which we pray that our nightmares not come true, and unfortunately theirs did. In all of their memory, join me in bringing this shul back to life. Join me for a tanz.
The Jews of Tykocin are part of a much bigger picture in World War II. September 1939, Germany invades Poland. June 22nd, 1941, Hitler moves east. He launches a surprise attack against the Soviet Union. And of course, the first part of the Soviet Union that they conquer is Eastern Poland. And they move deep into the Soviet Union. It's also the beginning of the activities of a group of men called the Einsatzgruppen, a special unit of the SS, mobile killing squads, hard on the heels of the German army, these SS mobile killing squads would come into a town, take the Jews either to the Jewish cemetery or to a nearby forest and murder them by bullets. This is the beginning of the final solution. Jews are sitting in the Warsaw Ghetto in June 1941. And it's true, many of them are dying, but it's not the mass annihilation of the final solution yet. The final solution begins with the Einsatzgruppen. August 1941. The town has been under German rule for about 6 weeks. The Germans announce that all Jews have to appear in the Rinnek, the market square, at 6 a.m. the next morning. The men are ordered to march, and the women are put on trucks with the children. And here, on that day in August, about 1,400 Jews, the vast majority of the population, Jewish population of the town, are murdered in one very brief killing spree. They're put into 2 mass graves, over here and right behind me over here. The next day, the Germans, conscious of the fact that some Jews had escaped and must have been in hiding, begin to comb not only the houses of the town, but also the houses of the villages nearby, where some of the Jews had sought safety. About 150 Jews are rounded up, and they're murdered in the mass grave behind us over there. On those 2 days of August, about 1,500 or 1,600 Jews are murdered, and a Jewish community that had existed for almost 450 years is wiped out in 2 days.
David said 900 communities throughout Poland, almost all of whom have been erased, eradicated, forgotten. So when they arrived at this spot, you may wonder, why didn't they run? Why didn't they flee? Why didn't they try to hide among the trees? Why didn't they grab a child, their children, and go? And apparently there are eyewitness accounts who say that there were those who did try to run, who did try to escape, but the Nazis had dogs who ran after them and tackled them, who grabbed them. They were brought back to this spot, and an eyewitness testimony says that as a punishment to those who tried to run, a young baby was grabbed by the Nazis. And they took the baby by the legs, and against one of these trees in this very spot, they swung the baby, smashing his head against the tree, killing that poor, innocent, precious neshama who did no wrong, who had no sin, iniquity, who had no reason to be hated. That took place in this spot. It took place right here. Why are we here? Why are we on this journey? We're observant Jews, we're Torah Jews, we're part of an observant Orthodox community. But you know, all around us in America, there is a spiritual holocaust which is taking place. There is a disappearance of the American Jewish people. I'll tell you an amazing story. Someone I know's grandfather told him he was being beaten by a Nazi. And the grandfather of this person I know said that the Nazi, as he was beating him, was laughing and said, "You Jews, you're so stupid. You're such fools. Don't you realize it's over? Don't you realize Judaism is finished? In Europe, we're taking care of you. In Palestine, your neighbors will take care of you. And in America, you'll take care of yourselves." And here we are 70 years later, and that horrific prophecy is coming true before our very eyes. Do you know only 20% of American Jews are married to a Jew with Jewish children? Many aren't married, many have no children, many are intermarried, but it leaves among the American Jewish community, only 20% of American Jews are married to a Jew with Jewish children. 20%. 30 to 34 years old, there's a 74% intermarriage rate. The disappearance of American Jewry, where Jews are taking care of themselves. Why was this entire community wiped out in 2 days after almost 500 years of existence, only contributing positively to their neighbors and to the community? Because they were Jews. No other reason, no other guilt, no other charge, just because they were Jewish. They were killed because they were Jews. So why does being Jewish matter? How do we tell our American brothers and sisters that Judaism matters, that their being Jewish matters, that Jewish continuity matters, that our story must have a continuation and a next chapter? What is Judaism all about? We are a people with a sacred covenant and a sacred mission. We are not here on earth by accident. We have been hated since our very inception. And it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. And our mission here on earth is very simple. If we have to reduce it to its core, and one of the key messages of this trip is that we are here paying tribute to the Kedoshim, to the sacred martyrs who gave their lives for no other reason that they were Jewish. They died al Kiddush Hashem. In the Warsaw Cemetery, we saw 250,000 tombstones, matzevas. But for those in this mass grave, and that mass grave, and the third mass grave, there is no matzeva. There is no tombstone other than you and me. The life we live, the choices we make, the enthusiasm, the passion with which we live our Judaism, the commitment to care not only about ourselves and our local observant community, but the entire Jewish people, wherever they are in the world, of whatever background, whatever education, whatever level of observance, whatever choices, whatever orientation. But not only to die al Kiddush Hashem, but a willingness and a commitment to live al Kiddush Hashem, to dedicate our lives to sanctifying God's name, because that is why we're here on earth. That is the core mission of our people. To eradicate such evil and respond with goodness and with purity and with light to dispel the great darkness that defines this country and this region and too much of the world. But we can't be in these spots. We can't visit these sites. We can't shed a tear for these unimaginable numbers and not be transformed to go back to our lives at the end of this week. And to say, what is my life all about? My hobbies? Nothing wrong with having hobbies. My parnasa, my livelihood? It's wonderful to earn a great livelihood. But what is my life? What is my legacy? What's it all for? What will be written on my matzeva? What a low handicap in golf I had? What a great mahjong player I was? The house or car I owned? Or the difference I made to those around me by living a life that matters Jewishly, not just humanistically, but what it means to be a leader in the Jewish people. And there are no shortage of opportunities. If Tykocin was 49% Jewish, at times higher than that, our community in Boca is over 50% Jewish. Only 8% are affiliated. 92%. And affiliation was measured by if you work out at the JCC. Not if you're a member of the synagogue or attend davening or have a chavrusa. If you worked out at the JCC, you qualified as affiliated, and yet it was only 8%. 92% of the 130,000 Jews who live in our neighborhood, in Boca and Del Rey, are waiting for us to see a passionate Jewish life. Too many think that being observant means being judgmental and dismissive, being narrow-minded and restrictive, being archaic and living in antiquity. We know that's not what it's about. We have the most blessed lives, meaningful, purposeful lives. We are here dedicated to God's mission for us on earth. And why are we waiting to share it? If we want to honor those who died al Kiddush Hashem, it is time for us to live al Kiddush Hashem. To ask ourselves, what more can we be doing? What more can we be doing in our own lives? Nourishing and nurturing our own soul and our own spirit. An empty, barren shul in Tykocin. You could hear the echoes of a Jewish people from long ago, but it's silent, other than we fill it with mincha. You know what? You can go to mincha every day at Boca Raton Synagogue, a few times a day. You don't only have to daven on a trip to Poland, there's opportunities wherever you are, every day. And if you can't make it to Minyan, at home. Our learning, our davening, our midos, our soul. This trip has the ability and possibility to light our wick of flame, to make our candle glow, to illuminate the world, to fulfill the purpose for which we are here. But will it stay lit? And will it light another candle and another candle and yet another candle? Because you know the beauty of a candle? You can light 6 million candles and it doesn't diminish your flame an iota. Every other act of giving, what you give depletes what you had. But the light of a candle, you can light the candle of those around you and it doesn't take away from what you have at all. So as we light these candles, in memory of the Jews of Tykocin and all of the martyrs of the Holocaust, as our souls have been stirred and touched by what we've seen in this day and a half and what we will yet see, today, Treblinka, tomorrow, Majdanek, Friday, Auschwitz, Birkenau. We've barely begun to scratch the surface of what we will see. Expose your wick so it can be lit, so it can catch fire. And when it does, make sure to add fuel to keep that flame alive and use that flame when we get back to fulfill our mandate of Nikadesh Eshimcha Ba'olam. Because if we care about the Jewish story and the Jewish people, then the words of that evil Nazi Yamach Shemo v'Zichro cannot come true. Europe succeeded in eradicating so many of our ancestors. And in Palestine, now Israel, they remain bent on taking care of the Jews there. But in America, we must not be allowed to take care of ourselves. And if there's going to be a difference made, it'll be up to us.
Be